Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm here with DiamondDeploy. Say hi, Diamond.
Hello.
And we're going to be going over his Palicium Midrange deck list from Space Cup 3, where he got second place. 'Cause it's a pretty interesting deck list. It's a little bit different than other stuff. So we'll just go through it and then ask some questions about it. Interview style, because it's really cool and fun. So Diamond, what do you think is the main thing that sets your deck apart from other Palicium lists, right?
I think the uniqueness of the deck is that it's a bit slower. It plays more the resource game where it worries about protecting your resources and having more towards end game, rather than controlling really early game and playing aggro of sorts.
Yeah. How do you one second.
Okay.
Okay, how do you think that helps you and what matchups do you think that helps your deck with? Do you think?
I feel like in most matchups it slightly performs better than Palicium, other Palicium builds, though in the Palicium mirror it seems to be it has a rough play against because they're more for accelerating the game and they'll perform a little faster and better. But into like birds, it does a lot better because you don't burn resources as quickly. Into OTK, it can play super aggro. Um, and overall, it's a very good build for most other decks.
Nice, nice, nice. Okay, let's start going through some of these cards. Some of the stuff is pretty standard, so we probably won't talk about it too much. Like Palicium, obviously, is the planet. That's
Yes,
not too
yes.
important. Uh, two Blur, two Rowdies, pretty standard.
Mhm.
Two Serpent as well. Two Paju. Do you think I don't know, how do you feel about Paju actually?
I Podge is an interesting case. It's something that I've thought maybe subbing out for like Ice and Slice would be fine, but once again, I think the recursion of Podge is also pretty nice. I think Podge is an okay card. I think there might be other options, but for its purpose, I think it does the best at its job. Where it's more of where it's pretty good gob material to use for the Gabostrus effect.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty good for even just taking out a lot of the smaller things. When you look at a lot of chump blockers get beat by the 100 power, and then it could also be used as a blocker to set up for later plays as well if you do use it into a chump blocker. But Palicium may have better cards. I just think it does really well for its current purpose, and it could be subbed out. I could see a good case for that as well.
Yeah. Okay, and then Duplo's pretty standard, and I think the really interesting card in your list is Mystical Beast of the Deep, right?
Yes, yes.
That's the kicker.
Mystical Beast of the Deep is a really good card in my opinion. It has some really nice targets. It takes out Pelfams, it takes out Cranchons, it takes out Gabostrus after it's used an effect, which is fairly common to use a
Mm-hmm.
Gabostrus effect. It takes out Sky Kazarak. It takes out if we're looking at the borrow matchup, it takes out even an unflipped De. It takes out a lot. That 340 is really nice.
Uh-huh.
And then taking it out by effect, well, in borrow is probably the only place where that's really going to happen. So it usually procs its own effect. And once again, for the resource game, is very important.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Do you like it at one? You think that's a good ratio?
I think main decking one is fine, and I do like to sideboard one as well,
Yeah.
because into things like into going into birds, if I do a quad wormhole with two mystical beast, it's like I recurred six creatures rather than just four. And
Yeah.
I think for that purpose, it's good to have maybe in the sideboard at one as
Nice,
well.
nice, nice. I think another pretty interesting one is Mantilossus, because I know there's I feel like a lot of Plisium lists, it's either you're playing Mantilossus or you're playing Sodrius, right?
Yes. I have actually been a little more in favor of Sodrius recently for the purpose that I don't think 400 as is as important now.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things already get over. Um, a lot of things do get over the terms of Sodrius, but when we look at the current format, it's either you're at 400 or you're at 500. Really, there's really no. If you're lower than that, you're not doing a ton. So Manta might not be as useful. I still prefer it for the purpose that it puts itself in a lock with Gabostrus, where it's just you're a stalemate if you played against a Gabostrus.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Otherwise, though, I think it's. I think it and Sawdrius are probably your best bets. I can even see a 1-in-1 case where you don't run 2 Manta, but you run 1 Sawdrius, 1 Mantalossus. I could see that, but I just prefer the 2 Mantalossus for the stall possibilities.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think they just play different. They play differently into different matchups, right?
Yeah.
And then you had two Cranchon, which was pretty standard, and then we had the two Gabostras, which is pretty standard, and then you had Cranchon of Palicium as your final placing creature, which I think is interesting because I think you and Oddish play this, but I didn't see Fish play it in his list. So how do you feel about that one?
Um, so Cranston Palicium, I think, is necessary for any Palicium build. Um, Even after I had talked to Fish after our my loss in that was no response
Mm,
in that loss. He had actually told me that he didn't have it when he meant to have it. But in general, it's just a really powerful tool. Um, and the fact that you could bring back rowdies or even duples, you probably don't want to bring back Podgy, but if you have the zones, you could, I guess.
mm,
But in general, like you bring back duples, which bring into further plays. You can bring back rowdies for serpent plays. It's just a very versatile card, and it having 500 power and 400 health is just very good. It's just very good with the stat line it has.
yeah, nice, nice, nice. Then I believe the final creature, the only one that's not from Palicium, is Pelfam, and that's kind of a staple. I don't think we want to dwell on that too much, but it is there. Okay.
Yeah, Pelfam's pretty stable. It's in
Yeah,
every
yeah.
build.
And then as far as resources go, I think this is pretty standard too. You ran two spoons, two cosmic treasure, one crash. Like obviously most of these are staples, pretty much,
Mhm.
right?
For the most part. The sideboard is where we get into more. It's a less staple, I would say, but
Yeah, I
overall,
think it's more interesting resource sources in the side. And then as far as attachments, we just had fan matter, obvious staple, and then Whirlpool Jetpack. I'm actually kind of curious what you think about Whirlpool Jetpack in the format, since at least from my perspective, right? Like since the format has warped around Whirlpool Jetpack, like has become less strong. Um,
I think Jetpack is. I'm tempted to entirely remove it from the list. Uh, I've rewatched all my gameplay that I stored from a Space Cup 3, and the chances you get off a warp hole jetpack effect are slim because nowadays people will either Gabostrus it. You have birds who will just kill it. You have Calamask everywhere who's going to remove it as well. Every other build has some way to remove attachments, and I think jetpack's just not worth running anymore. I think I'd rather main deck a quad wormhole for the purpose that it does a better effect if I have MBOTD anyway.
mm, yeah, that's pretty interesting. And then we'll get into the activators. I think these are fairly standard as well in the main deck. Leviathan Crown, one activation activated activator, two fields, one turret, and one beast. The one thing I actually do want to talk to you about is how do you, as far as ratios go, how do you feel about the one triple A in deck?
I I think that was a mistake on my part going into Space Cup 3 to not have the second in main deck. Um, in general, 2 in main deck is just very strong.
Mm,
Um, with the removal of Jetpack in my recent list, I think that another AAA is definitely worth playing. But in general, I think 2 AAA is fairly better than 1. I think 1 though is fine if you plan um, to go for a more rebuild kind of style where you rebuild your board more often than trying to control what your opponent's doing. But in general, I think controlling what your opponent's doing with Palicium is probably the better run.
yeah, yeah, nice, nice, nice. Okay, and then I think that brings us to your sideboard, which I think is also quite interesting. Uh, you ran the for creatures, you just ran Mystical Beasts of the Deep, which I think we touched on earlier. Um, but then for resources, you ran Quadruple Wormhole, which is a pretty interesting choice. I don't think I've seen that too much recently. So how do you feel about this inside, at least?
Quadruple wormhole inside, I think, is I think it's very good in Palicium for the purpose that Palicium builds are mostly Palicium creatures, right? At least in my build, I have only one Pelfam.
Yeah.
So everything else is a Palicium creature besides the one Pelfam. So I have lots of targets for quadruple wormhole. I also have nine, no, yeah, well, 10 7 plus star Palicium creatures.
Mhm.
And if I side in the second MBOTD, I would have 11. So there are a lot of strong targets for it, even going further into endgame. And it's definitely not useful for every matchup. So that's why I prefer it inside. But it is definitely very beneficial for a lot of matchups, like going into birds or into um, borrow. It's pretty good because borrow will wipe your board very quickly. Um, in general, I think it's a good card to have at 1. 2 was a little interesting on my part, but definitely at 1 is worth it.
Okay. And then you had the second AAA and sideboard, which I think we talked about. Did you side this in a lot? Was this like basically every game or?
Every game, I basically sided in the
Yeah, yeah,
second AAA.
yeah. Okay, and the last two cards in your sideboard were Erratic Void. I think this card is interesting because I think this card is incredibly popular in sideboard, but um, I'm not sure how I feel about it personally, so I'm just wondering.
So for Erratic Void, um, it's an interesting card for the purpose that if we consider the playing into Pally,
Mhm.
um, they have 4 forms of creature protection negate, where usually they'll have the 2 AAA and the 2 crown. So they will generally have 4 ways to protect their creatures, 2 of which are omni protections with the 2 crowns, and the 2 AAAs are just versatile in terms of only activators.
Right, right.
Um, and normally they have uh, only 2 targets that they really care for with the crowns, which are Galaxy Crash and Beast of the Black Hole. So they don't have a lot of things to really pressure using the crown. So I think when you play the AAA, when you play the Erratic Void, you are forcing a crown or you're forcing a AAA because, and there are cases where they do just let it go, um, but especially in like the early to mid game, it's a very powerful tool because the Pally player isn't sure if they want to use the activation activated activator or if they want to use the crown to prevent it or if they just want to let it go through. It's a very powerful tool in that sense. I think at 2 might be excessive because once again, it loses a lot of versatility in the mid to late game because
Mhm.
you're probably fine with letting those bounce because you'll just recur with like Jetpack if you do get it off, or with like um or you'll recur with if you're running my build at least you'd have like the Mystical Beast the Deep or the quad wormhole. You have many ways to get back. So I think mid to late game it's not as useful, but in the early game it is definitely a very powerful tool to have.
Nice, nice. Well, I guess that's all the cards. Do you have any like closing thoughts, things you would have done differently as far as building goes?
Yes, definitely would have played the second uh, AAA in main deck. Probably would have removed the double jetpack. Would have put maybe a jetpack inside, but I definitely would have probably mained one quadruple wormhole.
Hmm.
Uh, Maybe remove the Paju. I like Paju, but I think there might be other options. Well, I'll have to look into that a little more. But strictly for this tournament, I would definitely would have put the second AAA, remove the jetpacks because every game I sided those out. They just weren't worth playing.
Yeah,
And I definitely would have probably put a second Mystical Beast the Deep in main and uh, called that it. I would have. I think that would have been a much better build. I will say.
nice. Well, thank you for coming on the show, and congrats on your second place finish.
Well,
Um,
thank you. It was a bit of a ride.
yeah. In the as far as the viewer goes, in the description, I will put a paste bin to Diamond's list if you want to try it out. It's there. There is a link to the Discord, obviously, so make sure to join and playing some tournaments. That I'll probably be covering a couple more of the finalist list from Space Cup 3, and I'm going to also try to shout out the other finalist lists that are being covered by other people, mainly like Oddish. So we'll look forward to that stuff. And thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Woo, Chaos Galaxy. Okay, bye.
All right, bye.